Hi, I've had loads of questions about how to gauge what level of instruction you should give to your learners. And this is something many PDIs get wrong and causes them to fail their Part 3. So here's a short extract from my Part 3 online training course to help you understand how to assess what level of support you need to deliver, how to get your students totally engaged regardless what level of instruction you use, and why levels of instruction aren't a linear process. If you find this video helpful, please hit the like and subscribe buttons, as that will massively help me to grow this channel. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll reply ASAP. I'm also going to explain how you can get a 30% discount to my 4 PDI and ADI video training library. More about that at the end. Okay, so as we have already talked through, the 3 levels of instruction are generally referred to as full talk through or guided, prompted or Q&A, and independent. And if you were to take somebody's full course of driving from being a complete novice to being test standard and beyond, then there is to an extent a linear process. So with most things, you would start off giving full talk through, then you move through to prompted or Q&A, and then you'd move through into independent. But as we've also just said, whilst as a principle, that is true and it has a structure to it, there are going to be situations and cases where the general rule doesn't apply. Okay. So how do you assess the level of instruction that somebody needs then? Well, in order to do that, you need to take in 3 sort of separate factors. So first of all is their level of knowledge. So if you were to ask them, for example, to talk you through, whilst you're both stationary at the side of the road, what they know about how to do a parallel park, and they were able to talk you through to quite a high level of knowledge, exactly the elements that would be involved in doing a parallel park, then that would suggest there isn't much, if any, of a knowledge gap there. Okay, so their level of knowledge would be good. However, they've never done it before, so their level of ability would be non-existent, and you don't really know what their level of confidence is at that stage because they've never done it, so they don't know how they're going to feel about it. Or perhaps they have been speaking to one of their mates who has told them that the parallel park is an absolute nightmare. It's really, really complicated and it's the most difficult maneuver of all. And therefore, that might have already knocked their confidence, even though they've never done it themselves. So what I would say is if you're working either with somebody that has a low level of knowledge around the subject matter, or a low level of ability, or a low level of confidence, then again, the best place to start is right back at full talk through. Okay, it will help move them on to the next stage. So their overall level of ability with regards to driving might be high, but if they've never done parallel parking before, then their level of ability on that subject is low. Their level of confidence overall as a driver might be quite high, but on this particular subject, their level of confidence is low. So wherever you've got something that's at a low level in knowledge, ability, or confidence, start off with full talk through. If you would sort of rate them somewhere in between novice and test standard, either in knowledge, ability, or confidence around a particular subject, then you're starting off more with prompted or Q&A. But be aware they may have a false sense of their own ability, which means they've got a false sense of their own confidence, and their knowledge might be okay, but perhaps not as good as you perhaps would want it to be. So if somebody came to you, for example, having already had previous lessons with another driving instructor or with mum or dad, so they've had some on-road experience, it's not uncommon for them to say, almost in a braggy sort of a way, that they're pretty good and they've done this and they've done that and they know how to do this and they know how to do that. And they can lead you into a false sense of security. And you're thinking, all right, okay, well, should be quite a straightforward lesson then. And then you ask them to get you moving, and then within a few minutes, it all goes pear-shaped. You're needing to dual control the car, and everything is a bit of a nightmare, really. Because what you've now realized in reality, the knowledge, the ability, and the confidence isn't really quite where it should be for the level of instruction that they've sort of asked for, or you've assumed that they would need based on what they've told you. So again, for your safety, their safety, and anybody else's safety, if a new driver is coming to you and they have had, or at least say they've had, some previous experience, I would start off with a higher level of instruction than you think may be needed. At least that way, you'll still be keeping things controlled and safe. If you are then watching them, so for example, you're coming up towards the end of the road and you say, at the end of the road, we're going to be turning left. And then you start to watch what they're doing. And as you're about to say, so check your center mirror, left mirror, they're already doing it as you're saying it, then that would suggest that, they probably got their head around what we've talked about before in the past, is the MSPSL routine, or the M for short. Okay. If they're getting there along with you, that should give you a clear indication that at least with the basics of driving, their level of ability, their level of confidence, their level of knowledge is sort of somewhere in the middle. They're probably at the intermediate stage. So then you can very quickly back off by just turning around and saying, oh, that's great. I can see you know how you do your MSM routine. That's brilliant. So I won't mention that again, but I will just watch just to make sure you do it. And then you can pay attention to perhaps another aspects of their driving. The next thing might happen is you're coming up towards a roundabout. You're ready to talk them through it, but then they're giving you clear visual clues through the way that they're handling the car, that again, they understand what they're doing and how to do it. So again, you might start to give them full talk through and might carry that on through the first roundabout, but then you can turn to them afterwards and say, again, brilliant. Like, it's clear that you know what you're doing with regards to roundabouts. So the next roundabout, unless I absolutely need to, I'll just back off and let you get on with that on your own. So it's much better to do it that way round and start with a high level of instruction and ease that off quite quickly if the visual and the verbal clues are coming back from the driver, then assume that they know what they're doing, assume they're going to get it all right, and then you're having to dual control them to avoid a safety critical situation. Because that way, you're not only giving yourself a fright and perhaps other road users a fright as well. You could be risking your vehicle and then having to put an insurance claim in. And of course, think about the impacts back on the student as well. Now, you could then point to them and say, well, you told me you were a lot better than clearly you are. Why did you tell me that? Well, that's what people do sometimes. They wouldn't necessarily have deliberately tried to mislead you. Sometimes people just have a false sense of what they can do. And then things go wrong. So hopefully you can see, and hopefully you agree, that it's far better to start off with tight control and loosen that quite quickly, rather than loose control and then finding a rapid and urgent need to suddenly jump in and control everything. Okay, so again, when it comes to levels of instruction, what we're really looking at doing, regardless of whether we're using full talk through or been A, prompted, or we're getting into the independent stage of helping somebody, we're still looking for the same principles when it comes to how we engage with students. There's lots and lots and lots of research that's been done over many decades around the diagram that you see on the right, which is generally referred to as the learning pyramid. Okay. So as I suggested, when I start out with a brand new learner, even though I may know, because I've asked them, that they know very little or nothing at all about how to get a car started, how to get it moving, how to steer, how to stop. And the likelihood is they still know how to get themselves set up in the driving seat. They've probably done the same thing from the passenger seat thousands and thousands of times. So they probably know the driver's seat moves backwards and forwards and often up and down as well. They probably know the backrest moves in and out as well. They won't necessarily know where the handles are for those things, but they'll know it does it. They'll probably know that there are 3 pedals down at their feet. They may not know what they are or what order they're in, but they'll have a rough idea that they make the car either go or stop or slow down. They might not know what the clutch does, but they'll know that there's this other pedal that does something weird and that's got some sort of connection to the gears. If you point to the gear stick, they'll probably tell you it's a gear stick. If you point to the handbrake, they'll probably tell you it's a handbrake. And I've never, ever, ever had anybody not know what a steering wheel is. Okay, so, there's lots of stuff that they do know. So you don't need to be one of these boring instructors that right from minute 1, get your visual diagrams out, turn to the page or pages that refer to the DSSM routine and the cockpit drill, and then spend 40 minutes talking through exactly what they need to do to move the seat, to put a seatbelt on, to adjust the steering wheel, to check their mirrors, to go through the handbrake and the clutch and the pedals and the indicators and all of that. That really should take no more than about 5 or 10 minutes tops. Already, even though somebody's never driven before, by getting them to tell you what they know and show you what they know, and you having a conversation around that and then just filling in the gaps, they're already starting to get down into the lower levels of this pyramid. They are getting involved in group discussion, albeit it's just the 2 of you. They're practicing because they're doing things. And also they're telling you what they know. So to an extent, they're teaching you what they feel that they have gained in terms of knowledge over the years just by observing what other people do. When you're moving through the lessons, you've done the basics of turning left, turning right, you've talking them through roundabouts, and you're moving on to getting them to start to take more responsibility for aspects of the MSPSL routine in a variety of different road and traffic conditions. Then again, getting them totally immersed and engaged in what they're doing is massively important to the way that they take on board and retain knowledge. So you may be using mainly Q&A or prompted levels of instruction. But if you're regularly putting them over to the side of the road, when I say regularly, I mean sort of every 10, 15 minutes, as long as things are going okay-ish, then get the car parked up, get them chilled out, and then get into their heads in more detail than perhaps you have been doing as you've been driving around. So ask them to replay back to you the last 5, 10 minutes of driving that they did. Did anything happen that stood out for them that was either positive or negative or strange or unusual? It might not necessarily be something they did. It might be something noticed about somebody else. You could ask them to let you know what they've learned, what they've picked up, what stood out for them. You could get them teaching you to an extent. If they did a little bit of an error, perhaps they turned into a junction too quickly on the right, you could potentially then suggest swapping seats and get them to teach you how to do a right turn correctly. Just get them talking you through every element, and then you could compare notes afterwards and say, so great, you taught me how to do it correctly, but when you did you do it the same way as you just taught me? And what you're trying to do is lead them to the point of discovery where actually they've talked you through how to do it correctly, but they're not doing it correctly themselves. And therefore they're self-educating themselves to find a solution, as opposed to you just turning around to them and saying, you did that wrong, this is what you should have done instead. So let's practice that again, and I'll talk you through it so you get it right next time. So hopefully you can see at an intermediate level, you can still get them engaged by getting their brains activated, getting them thinking, and getting them down into those lower levels of the pyramid. And then, of course, when they're getting up towards independent stage, a test level or even beyond test, then of course they should be able to do almost everything by themselves. What they don't have though at that stage, probably still, is experience, and therefore their judgment may not be that great. So they may think they can get through a gap in a meeting situation where you're sort of sucking your breath in and thinking, we might do a push, hope we don't click wing mirrors, or hope to God that other driver lets us through. When they are getting near test standard, and I'm going to be a little bit sexist here and say mainly with lads or young men, the confidence can overtake their ability, and they think they can get away with things that they can't without a serious element of risk being involved. So again, this is where you can get down into the lower levels of the pyramid. And one of the things I commonly do with a young lad who's a little bit on the cocky side, shall we say, and they're starting to drive a little bit aggressively, heavy braking, heavy on the gas. It's not a smooth ride at all. And it's just all starting to go in the wrong direction. Before that gets embedded as a habit, what I do is I swap seats with them. I say, right, I'm going to go on 2 5-minute drives. And that's all. I'm not going to break the speed limit, but I'm going to use 2 very different driving styles. Okay. And we'll do the same route for both drives. And all I want you to do is just get a feel for how I'm driving. Just pick up on whatever you pick up on. I'm not going to give you any hints or tips. Just be in the zone. Just take note of stuff in your head. And then we'll compare and we'll contrast driving styles afterwards. So the first driving style typically I then do is to replicate what they're doing. So heavy on the brake, heavy on the gas, rushing up to situations, not forward planning, not anticipating what other people might be about to do. And typically, as you're doing that, they're grabbing hold of the door handle or onto the rest above the window. They're swaying about in the seat a little bit and being thrown about as they've been doing to you. And basically what you're doing is you're giving them a mirror image of themselves, albeit they won't necessarily pick up on that. Then you just stop and go, right, okay, so don't say anything just yet. Here's the next driving style. And then you drive to part 2 test standard. Okay, it's nice and smooth, lots of forward planning, loads of anticipation, defensive driving skills. You're trying to keep the car moving wherever you possibly can, and it is just as smooth as silk. At the end of that 5 minutes, you just turn back to them and say, right, okay, so 2 different driving styles, didn't break the speed limit at any point, same road, same types of situations that we had to deal with. From your point of view, what was the difference? And then they're going to come back and they'll say things like, well, the second was a lot smoother, it was a lot better. Then you can get into those Q&A again. So what made it better? What made it smoother? How did it compare to the first style of driving? How would you describe the first style of driving? And then, of course, you can go down into another conversation and say, so if you were to imagine yourself as an examiner for a moment,
and you had watched somebody drive with the first style of driving, would you have passed them on that driving test or not? And the answer is almost certainly going to be no. Why? Well, because it just felt too risky. Okay, would you pass the person that was driving in the second style? Yeah, all day long. Okay, great. So, given that you're trying to pass your driving test then, and you want to go on to be a safe and confident driver afterwards, what style of driving do you think it would be better for you to use? The second one. Great. Okay, so you've now educated yourself on how you should be driving. All I've done is painted a picture for you, and you've worked everything else out for yourself. So hopefully you can see through that how you can use different levels of instruction flexibly, and it doesn't have to be this rigid format of, right, okay, so now we're going to do full talk through until you are showing me that you get it. Right, now I can see that you're getting it. I'm going to move you on to doing guided or prompted, Q&A or prompted those instructions. So what that means is I will just ask you questions to see if you're going to do it correctly. And then you do that for 5 or 6 times. Right, okay, now what we're doing is we're now moving to fully independent. So what that means is you're now going to take full responsibility of everything you do, and you're going to show me exactly how you're going to do it correctly. Right? So levels of instruction don't work as rigidly as that. The principles are there. There are truisms around the terms full talk through or guided, and then Q&A or prompted, and then independent. But try to not think and act in those rigid guidelines, if you like.
Okay, so as promised, here's how to get unlimited access to my PDI and ADI training video library, where you'll be able to see me supporting PDIs to pass their Part 3 and ADIs to pass their standards check. There are already over 20 hours of face-to-face, in-car and Zoom training sessions, and I'll be adding more at no extra cost. Just use the link in the description or the first comment below. It's a one-off payment for lifetime access, which means you can watch videos over and over and over again on any device whenever it suits you. Plus, it gives you unlimited access to me for further guidance and support if needed. And if you purchase now, you'll get that 30% discount. Okay, that's it from me. Thanks again, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.